Imagine standing in a quiet workshop in Renaissance Italy. The room smells of wood, oil, metal, and paint. Candles flicker beside piles of paper. Strange machines cover the tables. There are wings, gears, bridges, weapons, and drawings of the human body. And in the middle of it all sits a man who seems unable to stop asking questions. Why do birds fly? How does water move? Why does the heart beat? How do muscles pull the body? Can a machine lift a person into the air? Could a human build a bridge strong enough to cross a river? The man is Leonardo da Vinci. Centuries before airplanes, helicopters, tanks, and many modern engineering tools, Leonardo was already drawing ideas that look strangely familiar. But Leonardo was not simply an inventor. He was an artist, engineer, scientist, architect, anatomist, musician, and observer of nature. And perhaps the most interesting thing about him was not what he knew. It was how badly he wanted to understand what he did not know. Leonardo was born in 1452 in the small town of Vinci, near Florence, Italy. He grew up during the Renaissance, a period when European art, science, literature, and learning were changing. He was the son of a notary named Piero and a woman named Caterina. Leonardo did not grow up inside a powerful university. Instead, much of his education came from observation. He watched water flow through streams. He studied animals. He looked closely at rocks, plants, clouds, birds, and human faces. He noticed details that other people might ignore. And those details stayed in his mind. As a young man, Leonardo moved to Florence and entered the workshop of the famous artist Andrea del Verrocchio. For Leonardo, the workshop was more than a place to learn painting. It was a laboratory. Artists worked with wood, metal, glass, pigments, mathematics, perspective, and mechanics. They built sculptures, studied light, designed machines, and learned how the human body moved. Leonardo absorbed all of it. He learned how to draw. He learned how to mix colors. He learned how to understand shadows. But he also learned something more important. He learned to look. One story from this period says that Leonardo worked on an angel in one of Verrocchio's paintings. His work was so impressive that later tradition claimed Verrocchio decided never to paint again. The story may be exaggerated, but Leonardo's talent was real. And soon, he wanted to work on his own. In his 20s, Leonardo became an independent artist. Yet painting alone was never enough for him. He filled notebooks with questions. He drew machines. He studied water. He sketched birds. He examined bones. He designed buildings. He imagined flying machines. His notebooks became a window into his mind. And inside those pages was a man constantly moving from one question to another. One moment he was thinking about painting. The next, he was studying the movement of water. Then he was drawing a mechanical device. Then he was studying the human heart. Leonardo did not see clear walls between art and science. To him, they were connected. If you wanted to paint a human being realistically, you needed to understand anatomy. If you wanted to design a machine, you needed to understand forces. If you wanted to understand nature, you needed careful observation. This way of thinking would define his life. In the 1480s, Leonardo left Florence and moved to Milan. He entered the service of Ludovico Sforza, the ruler of Milan. Leonardo presented himself not only as an artist but also as an engineer. He described his ability to design bridges, weapons, fortifications, canals, and machines. He even presented ideas for military equipment. But Milan would also become one of the most important places in his artistic career. Here, Leonardo began work on one of his most famous paintings, The Last Supper. The painting shows Jesus and his disciples at the moment when Jesus announces that one of them will betray him. Leonardo wanted to capture the emotions of the people in the room. shock, fear, confusion, anger, sadness. Each person reacts differently. Leonardo carefully studied human expression and body language. He wanted the painting to feel alive. But the painting also revealed one of Leonardo's greatest weaknesses. He was fascinated by ideas, but finishing them was difficult. He often experimented with new methods. And some of those methods did not last. The Last Supper began to deteriorate not long after it was completed. Leonardo was brilliant. But brilliance did not make him perfect. He could be slow. He could become distracted. He could abandon projects. And he often started more things than he finished. Still, his mind kept moving. While working as an artist, Leonardo was also studying flight. He watched birds carefully. He studied their wings. He examined how air moved around them. Then he began drawing machines inspired by birds. One of his famous designs resembles a giant mechanical wing. Another resembles a rotating spiral, sometimes compared to an early helicopter concept. But Leonardo did not actually build a working helicopter or airplane. That distinction matters. He was not secretly building modern aircraft in the Renaissance. Instead, he was exploring a problem that would take humanity hundreds of years to solve. Could humans fly? Leonardo believed the answer might be found by understanding nature. That idea was typical of him. When he wanted to understand flight, he studied birds. When he wanted to understand water, he studied rivers. When he wanted to understand the human body, he studied anatomy. And this led him to one of the most remarkable parts of his life. Leonardo began dissecting human bodies. At the time, studying human anatomy was difficult and often restricted. But Leonardo wanted to see how the body actually worked. He studied muscles, bones, organs, nerves, and blood vessels. He made incredibly detailed drawings. He opened bodies layer by layer. He looked at the heart. He studied the valves. He examined the structure of bones. His drawings were not simply beautiful. They were attempts to understand the machine of the human body. Leonardo even made detailed studies of the fetus inside the womb. He wanted to know how life developed. His work showed a level of observation that was unusual for his time. But there was another subject that fascinated him just as much. Water. Leonardo watched water twist around rocks. He studied waves and currents. He examined whirlpools. He thought about erosion and flooding. He imagined canals that could control water and improve transportation. He designed systems for moving water. To Leonardo, water was not just something people drank. It was a force. It shaped landscapes. It moved machines. It could destroy cities. And if humans understood it, they could also use it. His notebooks are filled with drawings of flowing water that look almost like modern scientific sketches. But Leonardo's imagination did not stop with peaceful engineering. He also designed weapons. He imagined armored vehicles with wheels and protective walls. Some modern people call one design an early tank. But again, it is better to be precise. Leonardo's machine was a concept. It was not a modern tank. His drawings also included bridges, catapults, giant crossbows, cannons, and other military machines. Some were practical. Some were difficult to build. Some may have been designed partly to impress powerful rulers. That was another side of Leonardo. He was a dreamer. But he was also trying to survive. Artists and engineers in Renaissance Italy depended on wealthy patrons. Leonardo needed people who would pay for his work. So he offered them paintings, buildings, engineering plans, military designs, and entertainment. His mind was his greatest resource. Yet his notebooks reveal something deeper. Leonardo did not simply want to create things. He wanted to understand why things worked. He asked questions about light. He studied shadows. He investigated perspective. He explored geology. He observed plants. He thought about the movement of the earth and the stars. He even questioned traditional ideas when observation seemed to tell him something different. This made him unusual. At a time when many people depended heavily on old authorities, Leonardo kept returning to direct observation. Look. Test. Compare. Draw. Ask again. That habit makes his work feel surprisingly modern. Then came another famous painting. A small portrait of a woman would become one of the most recognized images in human history. The woman was Lisa Gherardini. The painting became known as the Mona Lisa. Leonardo worked on it for years. He kept refining it. The expression is subtle. Her smile seems to change depending on where you look. Her eyes appear calm, but the face is difficult to read. Leonardo used a technique called sfumato, blending tones so gently that there are no hard lines around the features. It gives the face a soft, almost living quality. But even the Mona Lisa tells us something about Leonardo's mind. He was not simply trying to make a pretty portrait. He was studying how humans see. How light falls on skin. How emotion changes a face. How small changes in expression can completely change our impression of a person. For Leonardo, painting was another form of investigation. As the years passed, Italy became increasingly divided by war and political conflict. Leonardo moved between cities and patrons. He worked for powerful rulers. He continued his studies. But many of his ideas remained unfinished. And this is where the story of Leonardo becomes more human. We often imagine genius as perfect. Leonardo was not perfect. He was curious, but sometimes distracted. He was ambitious, but sometimes uncertain. He created extraordinary drawings, but left many projects unfinished. He wanted to understand everything, but one human life was not long enough. Maybe that is why his notebooks are so fascinating. They show a man who never seemed satisfied with what he already knew. In 1516, Leonardo moved to France at the invitation of King Francis I. He was already an old man. His hands were no longer as strong as they had once been. But his curiosity remained. He settled at the Château du Clos-Luz near Amboise. The French king admired him. Leonardo spent his final years drawing, thinking, and organizing his work. He carried some of his paintings with him. Among them was the Mona Lisa. The great inventor who had spent his life studying the world now lived quietly in France. He had never built a flying machine that carried a person. He had never created a modern tank. He had not completed every painting or invention he imagined. But his notebooks contained something more valuable. They contained questions. Questions about flight. Questions about machines. Questions about the body. Questions about water. Questions about nature. Questions about art. Questions about the earth. And those questions would survive him. Leonardo died in France in 1519 at the age of 67. After his death, his notebooks were scattered. Some disappeared. Some passed from collector to collector. Some were damaged. Some survived. And centuries later, people began studying them again. When we look at Leonardo's drawings today, we can see something remarkable. We see an early vision of mechanical engineering. We see careful anatomical studies. We see observations of nature. We see ideas about flight. We see bridges, machines, canals, weapons, and scientific experiments. But we should not make the mistake of thinking Leonardo predicted the future perfectly. He did not. Some of his designs would not have worked as drawn. Some ideas were based on incomplete knowledge. Some inventions that look modern were never intended to function in the way modern machines do. What makes Leonardo special is not that he invented everything before everyone else. It is that he refused to keep knowledge in separate boxes. Art could teach science. Science could improve art. Nature could teach engineering. Engineering could reveal how nature works. And curiosity could connect all of them. That is Leonardo's real legacy. Imagine him again in that old workshop. A candle burns beside a stack of papers. A half-finished painting stands against the wall. A mechanical wing rests on the table. Nearby, there are drawings of bones, muscles, rivers, gears, bridges, and stars. Leonardo looks at them. Then he picks up another sheet of paper. There is still another question. He begins to draw. For Leonardo da Vinci, the world was never just something to look at. It was something to understand. And perhaps that is why, more than 500 years later, we are still looking at his work. Not because he had all the answers, but because he never stopped asking questions.